Good morning. I'm John Bitson, the Menard Family Director of the Sheila and Robert Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth. Welcome to the Human Progress and Flourishing Workshop. In this workshop, we bring in scholars from across the country to present insights from their research and experience with the NDSU community. Topics focus on innovation, opportunity, and ways to increase individual and societal flourishing. I'm really excited today that we have Dr. Oudom Hean here today, highlighting some of the best at NDSU. I'm really excited to highlight our own people. He's a Challey Institute scholar. He actually won the Research Award last year, the Waldron Excellence and Research Award for Outstanding Researcher at the entire university, NDSU. Very deserving of it. If you have a conversation with Oudom and you don't get excited about research, even if you don't have any interest in research, I challenge you to have a conversation with him and not get excited about research. Every time I talk to him, I get super excited and want to do like 10 more research projects that I don't have the time to do, but he's doing several of them. So super excited to be able to highlight Oudom today. Oudom Hean is an assistant professor of finance at North Dakota State University and a scholar at the Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth. As an applied economist, his research interests intersect regional economics, financial economics, and public economics. His current work delves into the differing economic growth trajectories of U.S. urban and rural areas, focusing on factors such as innovation, implications of artificial intelligence, offshoring, housing regulations, and rural health care. He was honored with the NDSU Waldron Excellence in Research Award for 2023-2024. And again, super excited about Oudom being here, and thanks again, Oudom. So let's all give a warm welcome to Oudom Hean.
Thank you so much, John. All right, thank you so much, John. Good morning. Today, I'm very excited to talk about a critical issue that impacts millions of Americans, the housing shortage. And I want to make sure that I will make this presentation short. Don't worry about it. I know it is Friday, and I know next week is spring break, and I don't want to keep you guys here longer than necessary, okay? And, all right. So the housing price and rents have been increased dramatically, and that caused affordability housing for concern for many millions of American households. Today, we'll discuss about the cause of housing crisis in the United States, its economic and social consequences, and some policy and solutions that have been proposed to tackle this issue. While there are many policies and solutions out there, we won't be able to cover all of them, but I would like to focus on a few of them. You will see that some of these solutions are very effective in solving housing shortage in the US, while others have fallen short. So what are the causes of housing shortage in the US? There are many causes. I list a few of them here. Let us focus on the most obvious one. Well, the first one, and probably the most obvious one, is population growth and urbanizations. So US population have been growing at a very healthy rate, thanks God, relative to other developed economies like Japan, France, even China are facing the population decline, while us, the US population, have been growing, which is not a bad thing. Many Americans have been moving into major cities, and that led to an increase in housing demand. However, the supply of housing hasn't been kept up pace, and that creating affordability crisis. The second cause is the rising labor and material construction costs. During the COVID year, housing price have been increasing because there is a supply chain problem and the rising in wages. The third cause of housing shortage is regulatory burdens and zoning law. Lengthy and very costly approval process have been making have made home building more and more difficult. And a lot of major cities in the US have reserved a big plot of the land for single housing. And that makes it hard for home builders to build a more affordable housing options. The The fourth one, I believe most of you have known about this. The cost of borrowing have been increasing dramatically in the last few years. So the interest rate have been rising, and that make it hard for home builder to borrow and invest. The mortgage rate has been rising dramatically, and it make it hard for home buyers to buy home. Last but not least is investment and speculation. So the global financial crisis 2007 to 2009 is a good example of investment and speculation. Many investors purchasing home as an asset rather than a place to live. And that action have led to a shortage of houses for everyday buyers, right? So when demand for houses doesn't match the supply, what happened? There are many severe consequences, and I list a few of them here. Well, the first one, and probably the most obvious one, is housing shortage leads to an increase in housing price and rents. So the rent in the United States have risen more than 49% in the last decade, and that is more than double the rate of inflation. Okay? The second consequence is the rise of homelessness. Many American renters have been forced to be homeless, and that is very sad because they cannot afford rents and housing. According to the National Low-Income Household Housing Coalitions, for every 100 low-income renter, there are only 34 affordable rental property that are available to them. This shortage is very severe, and that is very bad. The third one is the widening wealth gap. I know a lot of you here are Gen Z, and you probably heard a lot from your grandparents telling you like, hey, look at the boomer are doing well, you guys do not do well because of you might be lazy or something, but right, I know, but that I don't think that it's completely true. The economic in the U.S. Condition in the U.S. have been changing dramatically, and homeowners, the baby boomer, have been benefiting from the rise in housing price, while the renter have been struggling, right? Home ownership in the United States have become more and more unattainable, and that is very sad. Ultimately, these consequences lead to a decline in labor mobility and productivity. Let's put it this way. If you cannot afford to afford to live where you work, you will be forced to have for a long commuting, or you have to be forced, even worse, to give up a good job opportunity. This will harm economic growth in the United States and lead to a reduction in labor productivity in the long run. All right, so we're in a very fun part. So what are the solutions to solve housing shortage in the US? Well, before I discuss some potential solutions to tackle these issues, let me start with a very simple basic concept of supply and demand. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Econ 101 downward supply curve and downward demand curve and upward supply curve. The intersection between these two curves give us the equilibrium price and the quantity demand for housing, right? On my left-hand side, I plot the housing supply in the US, the real-life data, housing supply in the United States, and the home price across time. You can clearly see that there is an inverse relationship between housing supply and demand, and home price. So what is the key takeaway? It's very simple. If we want to reduce housing price, we need to expand the supply of houses in the US. Any policy that restricts the housing supply or make it costly to build home will increase home prices. Let's discuss some example. So during the last election campaign, former Vice President Harris floated the idea that she would like to give subsidy up to $25,000 to first home buyer. Well, At the first glance, it looked like a good policy. Let us be honest, who doesn't want extra money in their pocket to help buying homes? I would love that. It's money, right? $25,000. It's not a small amount of money. So it sounded like a very good policy. However, from an economic stand, this is not a good policy because this policy will help boost the demand without adding any additional unit of supply into the market. So eventually, in the equilibrium, the housing price will increase, and that making home even more unaffordable. And another good example that you guys are very familiar with is during the COVID lockdown, the US government have issued a lot of stimulus check. And at that time, we have a supply chain issue, so it restricts the supplies of goods and services. What happened next? We have a spike in inflation, right? So this policy although might look great and might be okay in the short run, it cannot solve housing shortage in the long run. And if anything, it might increase the home prices in the long run. Another example is tariff. You should heard about that. So tariff tend to increase input costs. So for example, if we put 25% tariff on Canadian lumber and gasoline, that would raise price of construction. So it would make it harder for home builder to build affordable affordable units for American, right? So these might not be a good policy either. At least if you want to focus on making home more affordable for the people. So what are the solutions? Well, I'm a tech enthusiast. In addition to being a finance professor here at NDSU, I'm also an active investor with a strong passion in technology companies. So the reason is because I believe in their potentials in helping shaping our futures. So technological innovations such as 3D printing, modular and prefabricated construction, AI, as well as automation and robotic and automation, help building home more faster and cheaper and more efficient. A couple years ago, probably 2 years ago, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago hosted a conference on housing crisis in the US, and I was invited to participate. In one session, we focused on housing crisis in rural area, and most of you are from around this area. I live here as well, so North Dakota are rural states. Participants from academicians like me and CEO and NGO and local government express concern on the decline of housing stock in rural area. So it's like it's the chicken and egg problems. So let's think about it this way. If you are home builders, you don't want to build home in rural places because the demand for housing there is not certain, right? Like think about it. Why would I want to build home in rural places? Because after I building those homes, there might not be anybody to buy my homes, okay? But from a worker, let's say you are a high-tech worker, you can work from home. As long as you have broadband, and North Dakota is very good in providing broadband for the residents. You might not want to move there if you cannot find a good house to live. So it's like a chicken and egg problem. Home builder don't want to build home, and if there is no good home available in rural area, I don't want to move there, okay? I strongly believe that technology can be a solution to solve the housing crisis in rural area, as well as in urban area, okay? Well, we can talk about technology all day, but the biggest obstacle to housing, to affordable housing is regulatory burden. So layers upon layers of regulation or law and fee make it so hard to build new homes. And even worse, sometimes impossible to build one. Go to California and talk to a home builder. They will tell you that it takes 30 years, 50 years, I don't even know when. You cannot build anything in California because it's just so many regulations and many fees. Just to be sure, some building codes and environmental standards are very important to ensure safety and good quality constructions. I'm not saying we should eliminate all of them, but what I'm saying is that when single-family housing law blocking home builder from building a more affordable option like duplex, triplex, or when fee inflated the cost of constructions, or when permit take years, we artificially create a shortage of houses here in America. Okay? So to deal with that problem, we need to reform our zoning law. We need to streamlining permitting and approval process, and we need to reduce unneeded fee. I want to talk a little bit more about zoning, because I strongly believe that zoning reform is probably the most efficient way and fastest way to deal with shortage of houses in the US. So here I show you maps of some metropolitan area in the US. You're definitely very familiar with Minneapolis. You can see that the pink dots are for residential land zone for single family houses, but the rest are for other housing options. So clearly, many major cities in the US reserve disproportionately big plot of their land for single family houses. And that makes building more affordable units much harder. So we need to reform our zoning. How do we do that? We can either upzone, we can eliminate single family housing requirement and parking requirement. We could add additional accessory dwelling unit. So for those of you who are not, if you're from California, you're very familiar with accessory dwelling unit. It's simply like a small tiny house that you can put in your backyard, and then you rent it to someone like your grandpa or someone, your grandma, or maybe your grandma, your grandpa rent it to you. Okay, that is accessory dwelling unit. Think of it like a tree house, but instead of building on a tree, you're building on the ground. Okay. So here are some successful case studies where in which these cities are successfully reformed their zoning law. Minneapolis recently abolished single-family housing and parking requirement. California finally allowed their residents to build to add additional accessory dwelling unit in their backyard. Great. And Auckland, New Zealand, they are not in the US, clearly, obviously. They were able to upzone 3/4 of their residential area since 2016, which is amazing. When Minneapolis able to successfully reform their zone, look at the outcome. On my right-hand side, you can see the supply of housing in different cities. One of them is Minneapolis, the rest are similar Midwest city. Minneapolis show in the red line, they're able to add a lot of more houses relative to other Midwest city. And when they're able to do that, look at the rent. They're able to control their rent. By controlling, I'm not saying they put any law. By adding housing supply into the market, the rent in Minneapolis is actually declining. But the rest of other relatively similar cities in the Midwest have been increasing. Okay? Well, while zoning reform can be very effective and probably the fastest way to deal with housing shortage, it has been facing a lot of local resistance, such as the NIMBY opposition, not in my backyard, opposition, and it faced a lot of bureaucratic and political hurdles. So just to be sure, if we want to solve housing affordability crisis, we need to do something. And I believe that zoning reform can be one of the most effective ways to deal with this problem. How about rent control? Everybody probably very familiar with it because it's probably one of the longest policy out there. Where there is a pro and con to rent control. The proponent of rent control will say rent control will provide affordable housing to low-income renter. It could stabilize their economic condition. It could help, it could prevent displacement of those people. The proponent, on the other hand, will say rent control will reduce the incentive for landlords to maintain their rental property. It will, they will also say rent control will discourage people from building more rental property. And rent control, even worse, it could create black market and discriminations. Well, the economic literature have shown that a very strong evidence that rent control might be okay in the short run, but it is a terrible idea in the long run. Specifically, over time, it could exaggerate the housing shortage. So rent control is not a good solution. It's not a good solution. Another policy that the government could do is to provide financial incentives such as tax credit. The light tax, the low-income housing tax credit is one of the biggest federal programs out there that help incentivize home builders to build more affordable housings. Well, it could be a good program because it helps add more affordable units into the market, but it also has its shortcoming. The light tax is famous, I should say infamous, for being too complex and too costly to execute. Okay? Another problem with the light tax is that their rent is determined based on the area median income. So if you live in a very high cost area, even with this subsidy, you might not be able to afford the rent. Okay? In the last campaign elections, President Trump said that he would like to use the federal land to build more houses for the people. Okay? Well, there are two types of federal lands. One is in urban area, and the other one is in rural areas. So USPS, US Postal Office, have a large footprint of those urban federal lands. So I can see a good, this might be a good, I can see a good, there could be a good idea. So imagine like you have a building, a mixed-use building, where you have a postal office on the first floor, and the upper floor would be a residential area, right? That could be great. I don't think we should build houses in rural area, like on the federal park, and then incentivize people to move to rural area. I don't think that is a good idea at all. But I can see potential use for federal land in rural area, such as we can use it to harness sustainable energy, such as a wind farm or solar farm. That might be a great idea. Public-private collaboration, such as land banking, and here in Fargo and Moorhead area, the community land trust could be a great project to provide affordable houses for people. Unfortunately, some of these projects could be very costly and not sustainable, especially if you want to scale this project up. It could take a lot of money, and where those money come from? That is a big question that we need to answer. All right. Why don't we reduce mortgage rate? Recently, the borrowing rate had increased dramatically, and that make it hard for people to borrow and buy new houses, right? So why don't we just reduce the interest rate? That would be a great idea. It's a tough task, I can tell you that. But before I tell you why it's a tough task, let me explain you what are the factors that affect this mortgage rate. So in America, we tend to borrow using 30-year mortgage loan, right? And there are many factors that affect this mortgage rate. I list one of the most important one here. So the first one is macroeconomic factors, Federal Reserve policy, inflation expectation, economic growth like GDP, a recession. Those are macroeconomic factors. The second factor is borrower-specific factors. So if you have good credit score, your mortgage tends to be relatively lower. If you have a high bad credit score, you tend to have high mortgage rate. Okay. The last factor is financial market factors, such as the 10-year Treasury yield. I want to focus on the 10-year Treasury yield, that factors. On my left-hand side, I plot the 10-year Treasury yield and the 30-year mortgage rate. You can see that the 10-year Treasury yield have a big impact on the 30-year mortgage rate. Okay? Recently, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the Trump administrations want to focus on lowering the 30-year or the 10-year Treasury yield because they want to lower the borrowing rate. Okay, that sounds like a good thing. How do they do that? They want to cut government debt. They want to cut the supply of Treasury yield into the market. I know a lot of you probably already know about Doge, okay? And well, it's not a bad idea. The problem is like if you cut it too fast and if you cut it carelessly, you might hurt the other part of the economy. And we have to wait and see about that because the data hasn't come out yet. Oops, some Zoom thing. Okay, thank you. But to complicate these strategies, recently foreign central banks, such as Chinese central bank and other central banks, which are the big holder of U.S. Treasury notes, have been selling out our Treasury yields, Treasury note. So here on the right, on my right-hand side, I plot the holding of the the holding of U.S. Treasuries by foreign central banks. You can see that they start selling out since the end of the 2024. And when they do that, they could keep the 10-year yield high for a period of time. Here's the good news though. While the foreign central bank might not like our Treasury note, the demand for our U.S. Treasury note have been still high for private foreign investor and local investor. In the past couple of weeks, the U.S. Treasury yield have been declining. Which is look like a good thing, right? When they decline like that, the mortgage rate we also tend to we decline as well, which is great. The problem is it is declining because of the economic uncertainty due to tariff, the fear of recessions, and a speculation that the Fed might need to cut rate further if we indeed head into recession. So it's declining, and that's good, but it declined for bad reasons. Okay? So, just to sum up, if we want American people to be able to afford home or to be able to afford the rents, we need to focus on the supply side. Technological innovations, regulatory and zoning reform, financial incentive and partnership of the government and private sector are needed to tackle that issues. I think many local governments could learn successful story from Minneapolis. Well, of course, I'm not saying that they should just simply copy Minneapolis strategy and implement it in their area. Rather, I'm saying they could adapt and modify those strategies to suit their local need. And that's all for me. I would like to take any questions.
Yes, please, David. So I'm really intrigued
the single family housing. I think we should just eliminate that. I understand. So if you are homeowners, you don't want to be a duplex, triplex because it could reduce your home price. I can see that and I understand that. But if we really want to solve this problem, we collectively have to reform that zoning. If that makes sense. And if you are a homeowner, I'm sure you are a homeowner, you might not like it. And I understand that. I understand where you come from.
How about decreasing lot sizes?
Oh yeah, parking requirement, of course. Yes, that is also effective. Yeah, Minneapolis did both of that. They abolished single-family housing and abolished the parking requirement. I also agree with that as well. That's a good point.
So where do cars go when there's no parking requirement?
I think that should be led to the market to determine. If we need more if we need more lot, then the market will find a way to build more lots. And it could be like stack up like higher instead of just sprawling like that. To horizontally, you can build like a parking lot, overlay one another like up vertically.
So I'm not arguing with you because I enjoy the discussion.
Oh, I enjoy arguing, so we can argue.
I live in West Fargo. West Fargo is community, so people drive elsewhere.
Right.
So they can't just like eliminate vehicles that's been used to get to work and aren't jobs locally, they can use instead. So you're suggesting like neighborhood parking ramps.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying? Things like that?
No, I'm not suggesting like particular thing, but I'm saying it depends on the condition of local community. Like think about if you are in New York, probably building it upward is probably better. If you in West Fargo and we still have a lot of plot of land, be in different way. I'm saying let the market determine itself, and the home builder and the market are very smart in finding an innovative way to solve this problem. When you put a law that prevents the market to do its magic, we create problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm wrestling this because I'm thinking about where we live.
Yes.
And recently the Fargo City Commission did some changes to the parking requirement in certain zones. And so right now, it's better to build a garage.
Yes.
Which increases the size of the lot. And if you park on the street, but then if you park on the street, it makes it more difficult to clear streets. And for traffic to use streets.
Yes.
So I'm not the creative guy, I guess. I can't think of a good solution that crosses that barrier.
Yeah, so my solution is like, you want to relax the law so that home builder people can come up with a more innovative solution to deal with this issue. And it depends on what local need is. They might not be the same across cities. Yes, please. You have a question? No? Okay. Yeah.
I think I'll follow up on that question.
Sure.
Again, so city might have zones where we need to build single-family homes, maybe apartment complexes. So kind of allocating more land within its zone, maybe it is within the business district, decided business district, not really near a residential neighborhood, right? So for example, how about just the Fargo area? I'm not sure what is the latest news, but I think a few years ago I heard that a lot of apartments in Fargo waiting. So when you think about it, an apartment complex is much more affordable than a single family home. So the affordable options are not being filled right now in this particular community. So how does building more? I know one of the solution is bring down the rents that probably might have more people, but people want to kind of just move to an individual home. So how does this vacancies?
That is I think that is the easy answer to this. It's like when you build, what you're saying, and I agree with you, in Fargo area you see a lot of more apartment, right? People do not move into those apartments because the market here in Fargo is like they can still able to afford those single family. But when you say like when home builders start to build those rent and there's no rent, people rent it, what market gonna do? The rent gonna go down, And home builder will see like, oh, now building rental property is not affordable, it's not a good way to make business. We should build something else, like either single family housing or either duplex, triplex. The market will be able to determine that, right? If you put the law like, I'm not allowing you to do this kind of thing, then the situation is worse because maybe the market demand more duplex, but home builder cannot do that because it's blocking them from building those units. If that makes sense? Yeah. Yes, please.
I was wondering if you've looked at Houston at all, which is a city that has no zoning whatsoever. And if you know of it, if you think that works as a viable option for reducing housing costs.
I believe so. Yeah, I can see that Houston, the brand in Houston is like, I'm not saying I'm not gonna say I'm an expert of Houston City. I've been there one and just one in my life. I should have visited that again. But I love it. And of course, I'm not saying that just to be sure, I'm not saying every city should eliminate all building code, no zoning and everything. But Houston is a good example. Their rent is pretty stable over time. It's not increasing. And if you went to Denver, which I just went recently, during last year during Christmas, you can see that they start to have more duplex and triplex popping everywhere, and that help relax affordable housing home prices in those places. So yes, I agree.
What I would say to you about the zoning too, like in West Fargo, if you look at a zoning map of the city, the zones that have been created recently, let's say in newer parts of the city, are absolutely gigantic. It almost necessitates driving. Or if you're closer to downtown, it's sort of more, they're smaller zones, so you have commercial within walking distance, you have, potentially your job within walking distance. We build cities specifically to require driving, to require parking, to require.
Well, that's why West Fargo as a community doesn't really have much of a downtown, and our zoning code is dictated by the developers.
Right.
You look at our map, the zones are all over the place. There's no organization to it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, please. Liz?
So, and I may have this wrong, but my understanding in the case of landlords or developers is that they can take a tax deduction for vacant units. And so on the one hand, that would allow people to take a risk, right? You can say, well, it's okay if it turns out your buildings will fail immediately, you're not gonna go bankrupt. But on the other hand, it's often cheaper for them to have a vacant apartment, take it as a hit on their taxes, and they don't reduce the rent. And so you end up with all these expensive apartments that aren't being filled because it's a tax write-off for the developer. Is that, my preference would be for that tax write-off to go away, but maybe I don't understand.
It's, I think you might be right that might be a good incentive for some of them, but I don't think that it's a pervasive in the best interest of all home builders to do that. Because if you're talking about New York City, that would be too expensive to write out those taxes. But maybe in Fargo, probably true. But if you go to like a big crowded city, like that might not be a good idea. Those tax write-offs might not pay off. So I haven't examined that tax law yet, but at least at the moment, I can agree with you. We should take that tax away at the moment. Yeah, but for now.
So I want to ask about currently the tax rate in the country is reducing, like the amount of children being given birth to is reducing. So what do you think about? So my opinion is that why these government funds in building single homes when the population is like 50 or 100 years would like everything is going to regulate itself, right? Like it's going to self-regulate with the population. You know, increasingly increase the way it came in the last century. So why should we waste money trying to build single home for people when we have a population death rates that actually reducing?
If I understand the question correctly, you're asking that the population will grow and at one point it's gonna decline itself because it doesn't have enough resources. What the point of us doing this? Because the ecology gonna regulate itself to one point is sustainable. Is that what you're saying? Right.
So how, like, I just feel that it's no way to self-regulate itself instead of wasting money.
It could, you're right, but I'm gonna give a simple example. Before you self-regulated, how many years? So how many people do you want to see sleeping on the street? And crime rate, all this stuff. Maybe 100 years from now, population growth in the whole world gonna decline, which is, we kind of see the trend right now, but we don't want to keep seeing people living out the street, commit a crime, right? In the long run, John and McCain have a very famous saying, in the long run, we're all dead. How about what in the short run? We need to deal with that, right? Would you be okay, graduate, and then you have no home? Because you believe that in the next 100 years, everything's gonna be just fine, right? So that's probably my shortest answer to that. Yes, please.
So how about policies in terms of constructing cost-efficient apartments, like using different construction material and cost-efficient construction material?
Technology, you're talking about technology or?
Policies.
What's that? Policy that lead to a cost-efficient construction. If we have that kind of policy, it would be great. But to me, most of the time, I always say policy doesn't create more efficiency, tend to, at least for housing. I'm not saying all policy is bad, no. Just to be sure. But most of policy tend to be more restrictive, at least as of right now here in the United States. So if you want it to be efficient, you don't need to put any policy. But just to be sure again, I'm not saying that we should eliminate all the building code and everything. We want efficient, but at the same time, we want safety. Like I just talked with John this morning. We talk about some buildings still have asbestos, right? Maybe if you want a less costly building, you just don't care about asbestos. But asbestos might cause us cancer, and we still don't want asbestos in our wall, right? So some policy, although it might be building construction is more expensive, but it need to be there. But zoning, for example, single family zoning, I don't think it need to be there in every places, or much pervasive like that, if that makes sense. Okay. Yes, please.
Okay, so you talk about using technology as a solution to housing shortage, right?
Yes.
And you were talking about refocusing more on the supply side. However, when we tend to use technology, we know that it's not like a straight line. It's gonna, actually the downside where there is displacement of labor. And if people are out of jobs, then the supply is high, then there will still be no demand for it, like because people will be losing their job. And also let's look at the investment side of the technology. It's not like it's out there that they will have to buy, it's capital intensive. They will have to invest in a lot of things, and it's kind of like have a strain on their budget, which will tend to increase their borrowing.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I like the question a lot. So you allude to labor-saving technology. So technology could replace workers. In the case of the United States, that's not a problem though, because construction's sector have always facing labor shortage. And there's a lot of concern about President Trump for construction sectors. There's concern that this sector use a lot of immigrants. I'm not saying they use illegal or legal immigrant, but because of President Trump has stand on immigration, some of the CEO concerned that it would cause labor costs to rise up. So if technology able to reduce the reliance on labor, that's probably a good thing, at least in the case of the United States. Okay? Yes, please.
So an interesting point was brought up regarding city zoning laws. And across the U.S., this typically leads to us having hundreds of different types of zones. Do you think it would maybe be beneficial to have more uniform zoning laws? Like Japan's a good example, where nationally they only have 12 different types of zones, and as a result, Tokyo largest city in the world has avoided a housing crisis?
I don't have a good stand on this one, and the reason is like now you try to impose, let's say Fargo and Chicago should have the same zoning law. Now you impose another requirement for Fargo or Chicago, which is like one size fits all policy, and I don't like that. I think different local communities should have their own. They have their own local need, and we want to provide flexibility to those people. But at the same time, right now, zoning law is just so restrictive everywhere, and we want to relax that. Yes, please.
I'd like to add on to that, because on one hand, I'm against it.
Yeah.
We have 50 relatively independent states.
Right.
And run their states the way they want to. On the other hand, in virtually every state, they refer to certain standards that are universal.
Yeah.
Like the National Building Code.
Right.
National Plumbing Code.
Right.
National Electrical Code. So if we already have that consistency in those areas, wouldn't that support the efficiency of national zoning codes?
Yeah. So right now, those uniform law is the minimum requirement, and what local community does and add on the top of that. So you could add that, but then it becomes like a universal minimum requirement for everybody, and then the local community can add more and more on that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yep.
They really do.
Yep.
Quick question.
Yes, please.
Do you think that the policies would be better served if they were targeted towards the industry itself? Because I noticed that my experience with home, so I built a home 2.5 years ago. And
How'd that go during COVID lockdown?
it was an experience to say the least. But the thing is that I noticed that it was the developer that dictated basically the bylaws of the area. So even not just the lot that I chose to build the house on, but the entire sort of block. So they had rules where the house has to be a certain color, you have to use specific types of materials. It's a different thing. But the thing is that me thinking that even if Minneapolis's policy were to be applied, let's say for example in Fargo, it wouldn't really make much of a difference in terms of the outcome, because I think that, as someone said, it's the industry with the developers. You have 3 or 4 developers that will own 60 or 70% of the land.
Right.
And then that'll give them more sort of power in terms of negotiation, even when they talk to the city. And they go, okay, we want to move this here, we want to do this here, we want to do this here. So you think that maybe the policies would be better directed at controlling or compelling the builders to use specific types of materials or ways rather than zoning? And B, do you think that the technology that you suggest would also be better served in maybe finding more efficient ways at building rather than the zoning itself?
So the first question I want to summarize is whether we should design a policy that favors the buyers rather than the home builder, because
Targeted towards the industry.
targeted toward the industry. I think we need to I don't like policy, but we want to make sure that the industry itself is competitive. As long as you have a competitive industry, this problem is solved. What you alluded to is like the Fargo area, we have a monopolist.
Pseudo, basically.
Yeah, kind of.
Because there's really 3 or 4 builders.
Right,
Yes, and they'll control the land. You have other small builders, for example, but in that situation, you would have your own land and they would come build it.
yes.
I'm talking about the master developers, as we call them.
So this is the problem you alluded to is about the market structure itself. So I think I don't think we should put more policy or something like that. It's more about helping small builder and making it more competitive market. That would solve the problem. The second one about technology, sorry, what is the technology about? The question?
If it's more so, if it would be more targeted towards certain elements of the building process, right? So I can see, for example, if you were to use the application of artificial intelligence, for
Right.
example, if they were to
No, I think as of right now, a lot of local, I'm not saying, no, sorry, it's not, I think like as of right now, a lot of local government have some restriction on, you cannot use this technology. And maybe they don't have it yet, but they have a law that designed 100 years ago, and the law itself haven't updated, and they are not allowed to use those technology in this place. So I believe like we should relax more those laws and let the market work its magic on when it comes to technology. All right.
So we're out of time, but that was a great.
Thank you so much. Have a great spring break.